Croc Chat is sponsored by rodentpro.com. Not only do they supply me with the quality feeders for all my reptiles, they are offering you a 10% discount for being a supporter of Croc Chat. Use the code CrocChat10 with your next Rodent Pro order.
All right, so today we are chatting with Dr. Frank Mazzotti. Dr. Mazzotti, thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
All right, so you lead a team that has one of the coolest names as far as researchers go, the Croc Docs. So why don't we go ahead and get started by you explaining to us what the Croc Docs are, who they are, and what type of research or projects you guys currently have going on.
I will do that, but the first thing I want to say is how we got our name.
Okay,
We
perfect.
got our name from an article that appeared in Sports Illustrated, written by Ted Levin, who wrote a wonderful book on the Everglades called The Liquid Land. He had spent several trips, expeditions with me doing crocodile work, and he wrote about one of them for Sports Illustrated, and he titled that article The Croc Doc. And so that was the start of us being called, which was only me at that time, the Croc Docs.
That's awesome.
And now what the Croc Docs have evolved into is we are a team, as you described, of wildlife biologists and ecologists and environmental educators, ecological modelers. We have a lot of different skills. We're based in Fort Lauderdale. And what we primarily do is work on large reptiles in the Everglades. And so a big chunk of that, of course, is work on alligators and crocodiles. We also work on spectacled caiman, which are an invasive species in Florida. And a lot of the other work that we do is involving invasive species, Burmese pythons, Argentine black and white tegus, Nile monitors. So we spend really all of our time doing research to help natural resource managers understand what's going on in the ecosystem.
And that ecosystem being primarily the Everglades.
We call it the Greater Everglades because it not only includes the interior freshwater marshes, which are traditionally the Everglades, but Lake Okeechobee, and very importantly, the southern coastal systems, which are a mangrove fringe. That's where a lot of the ecological action and restoration targets are.
And that, of course, is where the American crocodiles are very
and alligators too.
Right.
They both occur there. They overlap, and although some people accurately call American crocodiles the saltwater crocodile, of course, it is different from the Indo-Pacific one. But both species prefer fresh water. It's simply that American crocodiles can tolerate salty water better than alligators.
Right. So a big part of then of what you guys have been studying is also restoration to the natural flow that has been disturbed through the Everglades. And I remember another talk with Joe Wazalewski referring to that interfering with the salt content becoming too strong.
That's correct. The big, to sum it up quickly, the big ecological problem in the Everglades that we're trying to fix is there's not enough water flowing through the system. We tried to go out the other night and do alligator surveys in the middle of the Everglades, which should be wet, and it was dry. We almost got stuck. And that means less water than should gets to the estuaries. And that's not only where American crocodiles are, but wading bird rookeries occur. And what we've been able to do is, I would describe it as firmly establish both alligators and crocodiles as indicators of ecological responses to restoration. You know, if we get the water right, are we going to get the ecology right?
Good. So as ecological indicators, most people think of ecological indicators as the smaller animals, the more delicate animals. So in what way are you using crocodilians as indicators?
Um, this is actually, I'd say, the first study where we've been able to do that. And what we can do is, for alligators, we tie alligators into hydrological conditions. That means the patterns of wet and dry. And so we can show how alligators respond in terms of relative abundance, how many there are, and health and condition by body condition to the differences in water management. And we've seen some small positive response of alligators to attempts to restore the Everglades. And then in the case of crocodiles, we've done something similar, except instead of patterns in wet and dry, we relate crocodiles to patterns of salinity because they grow faster, more of them occur, they're fatter, everything about them is in lower salinities. And that's what we're trying to do in the estuaries. We particularly want to avoid what they call hypersaline, which is saltier than seawater events, which are very damaging to the ecosystem and severely impact crocodiles.
Right. So a lot of people look at the Everglades and they see its breadth across the width of the entire lower state of Florida, and they think of it as a swamp, but truly it flows like a river. So going all the way up to Okeechobee, what is interfering with that flow right now?
Roads, Tamiami Trail, Alligator Alley,
Mm-hmm.
canals and levees, Miami Canal and the levee that's along it, L67, which is Levee 67. These things have been built to separate the wet environment from the where people live, and also simply go right across the Everglades. And canals and levees and roads impede the flow. So what was once a continuous system is now a fragmented system into compartments.
Man, it makes a lot of sense, unfortunately. Yeah, I've been on both Alligator Alley and Tamiami Trail, and it's easy to see they're going east to west, cutting like a big dam right across the entire system.
Oh yeah, you get on one side, you get water being impounded, and then on the other side, you get water that's too dry. So
Mm-hmm.
that the roads create conditions that are both wetter and drier than they should be naturally.
Right. So in this particular case, now a lot of people will say, big deal for the crocodilians, people who aren't into wildlife. But of course, it's a domino effect in the entire ecosystem. Everything's interconnected. But I also saw on your website you were part of a paper explaining the importance of crocodilians in their ecosystem. So how would you tell somebody that crocodilians are important? We need them. What have you found in that study?
I think the best example of that is alligators.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of other, both animals and plants, that depend on the presence of alligators. For example, alligators create nests, and nests are drier than the surrounding marsh. And nests can become areas where trees sprout because it's a drier condition. So they allow an area to support plants that otherwise would not be able to occur. But maybe more importantly, if you're a snake or a turtle and you're in the middle of the Everglades and you're looking for a dry place to nest, an alligator nest is wonderful. So when an alligator nests, it not only provides conditions for incubation conditions for its own nests, but incubation conditions for turtles and snakes, which lay their eggs in an alligator nest. And then conversely, alligators create conditions through trails and holes that are wetter than the surrounding environment. So as the marsh dries out, aquatic critters concentrate in the area and they can either survive or, in the case of many smaller critters, be eaten by wading birds. So the presence of the alligator, and we call doing those things in ecological engineer, make it a keystone species because many other species depend on its presence.
So, as ecological engineers, the gators are actually wallowing out and digging these deeper holes.
They sure are.
That's
They can do
amazing.
an amazing job, and quickly, if they have to, especially in peat substrates. Building a pond is a matter of hours.
Right. And then the other thing that's really cool, you mentioned the wading birds and the Everglades becoming a rookery. The association there, which can also be seen at the alligator farm and many other places, the symbiotic relationship of why they're attracted.
How alligators protect the rookeries from predators. Absolutely. It's a wonderful study done in the Everglades that demonstrated in natural areas this occurs. And alligators gather around rookeries. They're hoping for a treat of a hatchling falling out of the nest into the water. And in return, they keep raccoons from getting onto the tree islands where the nests occur. So it's kind of a small trade-off for the wading birds, because an alligator in a raccoon in a wading bird rookery is devastating. They'll just wipe out all the eggs and hatchlings.
Oh yeah, they're devastating no matter where they are. Here in New York, we took a group of kids out. Well, a friend of mine, another colleague, we have a big pond behind our school, and he went out one day with his environmental class, came back and said, "Oh, you wouldn't believe what we just saw." And they had pictures of a common snapping turtle just digging a nest and laying its eggs. The next day, I took my biology class out there, and it was all dug up and nothing but eggshells. The only thing that could have done where we are raccoons. One night, every egg gone.
So, I've seen them wipe out, probably 90% of a soft-shelled turtle nest in an area where they had nested communally. I mean, they like eggs.
They like eggs. Well, I like them for breakfast too, but mine are farmed. But at least the raccoons are part of the ecosystem, and there's that natural balance that occurs with other relationships. But you mentioned invasives. So you guys are seeing a lot of invasives. Being a New Yorker, talking to people who aren't necessarily herpers, reptile people, there's a misunderstanding maybe, or not a clear picture. How bad are the invasive problems, especially with the big pythons? We'll go with pythons first.
That's very true. Even down here, there's a lot of people that, in the middle of it, that don't really believe invasive species are that much of a problem. It's been, I think there's probably 2 species that it's been best established for. And one of those is the Burmese pythons, which has caused is the way to describe it. Severe declines in mammal populations. That was first looked at in terms of a correlation, but there's been some nice experiments to show that Burmese pythons are, for example, will go after swamp rabbits. And so there's been up to a 90% decline in some mammal species associated with Burmese pythons. The other species, and I don't think this is as well known, are Cuban tree frogs. It's a tree frog from Cuba. And in places in Everglades National Park, as an example, where Cuban tree frogs occur, they've almost completely displaced the native species. And that's probably through a competition of a result of both competition and predation. You've got a hell of an advantage if you're eating your competitor.
But yeah, people don't realize when they hear tree frog just how big a Cuban tree frog actually is.
Boy.
Well, you guys have
So
down
it
there what,
sticks to
green
their
tree climber.
window at night and starts its screaming mating call, and that gets their attention.
Yeah, I got a few friends that live in Florida, and they've told me about them. So yeah, people are aware they're there. And then, of course, black and white tegus are something that gets a lot of publicity outside of Florida as
They're
well.
there, but for many of the species, I will agree, the severe impacts have not occurred. The problem or issue is you can't wait for those
Right.
impacts to occur, because then it's too late to do anything about it. So if there's a potential, and Argentine black and white tegus are a good example, they're major predators of caiman nests in Venezuela where they
Mhm.
overlap. And we have gotten pictures of Argentine black and white tegus and videos of going into and emerging from an alligator nest with eggs. So, there's a potential there that could become a serious problem. And so the management option is to do something about it before that happens.
And that's one of the things that you guys are working on, removal of
That's
invasives.
correct.
And now, who was technically involved? I don't know if it was you guys or the FWC. We heard a lot about the robo bunnies all over the media.
That's a project that the South Florida Water Management District has funded.
And
And
they were
I
actually
don't know any results of that. I don't know if it's been successful or not.
okay. Yeah, that was an interesting story, and I think a lot of people misunderstood exactly how they were using. I heard people thinking that the snakes were going to eat the robots, and then the robots would be wasted. But
Would
I believe they
explode
were
or
caged.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, so it got way out of context, I guess, and how people thought that they were actually playing a role in helping.
I think well, a fair statement to make is there's a certain lack of accuracy with media accounts
Hmm.
of things that don't really help to get an accurate message across.
Right, no doubt.
I've had, I've been the subject of stories that were like that, and you can't fix it. Somebody writes a story, and then everybody else picks it up, and they don't check it, and they
Right.
just publish it. And then, how things go. One person, you may have played this game uh, in school or when you're teaching, where one person starts at one end to say something and they all
Hmm.
whisper in somebody's ear. By the time you get out to the other end, boy, has it changed. And
Yep.
so, I think a lot of that happens. But
Oh, it does.
the media goes for what's sensational, not what's educational.
Exactly. And it's unfortunate. We were sitting together for dinner at Croc Fest last month, and there was a local family who brought up Nile crocodiles. And that's another good example. Outside of Florida, or maybe even in Florida, I'm in New York. If you go to YouTube, go to some social media sites, they'll have you believe that Nile crocodiles are now taking over South Florida.
I remember us discussing that at Crocfest, and sure enough, it was several weeks later, I saw the YouTube, or at least one of the YouTube videos,
Hmm.
and it, and it's not true. I mean, it's just not true. There were three Nile crocodiles escaped from somebody who had them, and were recaptured. Two by Joe Wazalewski, gentleman you mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
We recaptured one of them that had made it to Everglades National Park. But there's no evidence that there's any more out there, and certainly no evidence that they're breeding, and less evidence that they're affecting American crocodiles, who, they make you believe that they've displaced American crocodiles. American crocodiles are doing quite well. Thank you very much.
There's a lot of people, even that I see in certain comments in Florida, that will still say they don't know or don't believe that crocodiles are native to Florida.
Oh, yeah. I've given presentations, and people tell me I was wrong. No, absolutely, absolutely. Crocodiles are American crocodile. is confined to the southern tip of the peninsula. And I am proud to say that Florida is the only place in the world that has both alligators and crocodiles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's another video that made social media. It's really short, of maybe Everglades City, but somewhere near the Everglades, where a crocodile and an alligator are having a little dispute.
Yes. Oh gosh, where was that? I remember that. Oh, it was. I do remember where that was. It was Shark Valley, and
Shark
it was
Valley,
along the
Lake Trail.
tram route.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, because that is really alligator country, but at least one crocodile and maybe more have made it up to that area. I think we've captured at least one, and live in that canal. And one, I think there was the if I remember, the video showed the American crocodile saying, "Move over, baby."
Yeah. Yeah, that was high walking. The gator stayed down on its belly in a submissive
Yeah.
posture, which, of course, everybody then wants to believe, based on Niles and Salties from Australia, that crocodiles are always the more aggressive. But what do you find at the American crocs?
And another example of how the media influences things. Yes, when people see an American crocodile, they think Nile crocodile or saltwater crocodile, and they remember the National Geographic
Mm-hmm.
special that shows crocodiles grabbing antelopes in the Meru River. Okay. The American crocodile is at the other end of the spectrum. It is, I think I could say with confidence, um, even the most gentle of the big crocodiles and not aggressive. I mean, we have picked up using tongs, hatchlings off the nose of a mother and have the mother just lay there while we
Wow.
were doing that. We're very grateful for that. Believe me, we were very thankful. In Mexico, in one area where I work, Sion Con, there was one channel that at the freshwater end had Morlitz crocodiles, and the salty end had American crocodiles, and they overlapped in the middle. As soon as you set the noose, you know which one you had, because the American crocodile would just go lay out for you, and the Morlitz would give you a bit of a tussle, like
Mm-hmm.
alligators do before you brought it in to
Nope.
the boat, and
There's no.
that was absolutely unwavering. So we are very, believe me, we're very grateful that American crocodiles have are not on the aggressive end, or are very unaggressive.
No, especially since they like coastal areas, and so do people. So I'm
So do
sure there's
people.
a lot of human crocodile interaction
Now
in certain
that
areas.
said, watch out your pets.
Right.
Keep your pets safe, because a small dog running along the side of an area that has crocodiles, that's like waving barbecue ribs in front of somebody. Watch out.
Mm-hmm.
So, they are a threat to pets, but you just need to be vigilant.
Right.
Somebody said, "Oh, I'm going canoeing in alligator country with my grandchild. What should I do to keep it safe?" And I said, "Well, don't throw it out of the boat and troll it." I mean, you know what I mean?
You and
Just,
your
just
grandchild.
exercise common sense, and you'll be safe. And you don't exercise common sense, and who knows what might befall you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was in Lake Martin in Louisiana, just outside the Atchafalaya near Lafayette, Louisiana. And there was a mother with probably a 9-year-old son. And he had his own kayak and he was ready to go. He was paddling in front of her. And she said, "Yeah, he was brought up here. He's used to this. He knows to stay away from the gators, and the gators know to stay away from us."
You show them respect, and they will return it to you.
Right.
You harass them, and be prepared for the consequences.
Exactly. So respect is the key word when it comes to any type of interaction with nature, big or small.
Yeah, if you see a bison or a buffalo in Yellowstone, same thing.
Too many people don't
Don't
realize that those are
antagonize it.
herbivores.
Don't get in front of it to get a selfie. Just don't do that.
They think it's an herbivore like a farm cow, and it's not going to do anything.
Yeah. Wrong again.
Exactly. Sometimes herbivores can be more dangerous when they're protecting their territory.
Moose.
Moose.
Moose, famous for that. They'll
Mm-hmm.
attack cars.
Seen that, especially when they're in rut. Yep. So we did talk a little bit about invasives. The caiman, on the other hand, they've been well established for a long time. And how common is it when you see caiman?
We're worried because they're expanding, and they're expanding into natural areas. One of the populations we're working on is right on the boundary of Everglades National Park. And then let me see the other. We've recently discovered another population that's in one of the water conservation areas. So I would say we're finding more caimans in more places than we did 5, 10 years ago.
Wow.
Don't know
And
why, but it
it's all
sure is
the
happening.
spectacle. Right. It's
Right,
all the
spectacle
spectacle caiman,
caiman,
right? Yeah.
spectacle caiman.
Yeah. A colleague of mine showed me some pictures when they were in the Everglades, did an airboat tour. And I just don't think she was paying attention. She's an earth science teacher. She loves the stars in the sky, but she wasn't paying enough attention. So she shows me this picture, and I'm like, do you know what that is? And she goes, it's an alligator. I'm like, no, didn't your guide tell you what that was? A picture, plain as day, a big spectacle caiman right next to the airboat.
Yep.
But she doesn't remember exactly where they did the airboat tour.
I wouldn't be surprised to find that it wasn't one of the tours off of Tamiami Trail
Mm-hmm.
because we've seen caiman on both sides of Tamiami Trail, and that new population is north, and it is certainly an area that could be traversed by an airboat ride.
Yeah.
And I'm a little surprised because there's a lot of valuable information that can be gained from those people running those airboat tours because they see a lot of stuff. I mean, they were the first people to tell us that out in the middle of the Everglades, big pythons rest on vegetation mats.
Mm-hmm.
And, we subsequently found from radio telemetry, yep, and not only do that, but they'll nest on them.
Wow.
And so they see a lot when they're out there. And if you make an active effort to get the information it can be very educational, very
But would
worthwhile.
make sense. They're out there several times a day
Oh,
with
yeah.
different tour groups, so
Yeah.
they're making the
Gladesmen and
rounds.
sportsmen can be a real important observers and
Mm-hmm.
well worth your time taking advantage of that.
As long as they know what it is they're looking at.
That's correct. That's why I was a little surprised because most of those guys I'd say, are pretty knowledgeable. But that said, I don't know how close I can remember. Oh God, one time right after I finished my PhD, I was in Penn State and I was called down to Florida because they wanted to put in a power plant and they'd done a survey and they said, oh, we saw a crocodile. We can't put in the power plant. And so I was called in to do surveys and came up on the animal. And guess what it was? Spectacled caiman. And so, I think on the other hand, it might not be that uncommon for people just to assume.
Right.
And because a spectacled caiman can be mistaken really for either an alligator or a crocodile. Its snout is a little pointy, but anyway, I think who knows.
Right. Yeah. No, most of them are very knowledgeable and they're aware of the invasive species, but at least
They're
here in
going
New
to be a
York.
target of an invasive species educational program that we're developing because we want them to help us find the Asian swamp eel, which is a new invader on the block and looks like it has the potential to cause the same level of damage that Burmese pythons do. There's already one area, Taylor Slough, where they've almost wiped out the crayfish.
Oh boy.
And the crayfish are an important food source for wading birds. So we're very concerned about the spread of Asian swamp eels, and I'll bet you we can get gladesmen and sportsmen to, either tell us they see them or go hunt them for us.
Mm-hmm.
They're good to eat. So come on, guys, go hunt for them and make yourself a meal and find out where help us find out where they are.
Yeah. Invasives can take over anywhere. We're in New York. We do have a few, mostly insects, plants, things that aren't as noticeable. I live really close to the Hudson River, and we have a problem with water chestnut, which just forms these big mats. They almost look like lily pads, but they're not rooted, and they just cut light out from natural vegetation, cause oxygen depletion, and all kinds of problems for us. But we're not used to seeing a ton of large animals like Florida. After Croc Fest, my wife wanted to see some manatees, so we went over to Blue Springs. And while we were there, while we did see the manatees and maybe a couple of sunfish, everything else as far as the aquatic life, the fish life, all invasive. Tilapia, giant 10 to 12 foot pleco, the plecostomus. And then these two giant fish went by. My wife goes, "What are those?" And I went, "Those are pacu." And it was just crazy. It was like being in an aquarium instead of in a natural river.
Well, we've become a hot spot for reptiles because reptiles like the same thing that people like in Florida, the warm temperature.
Exactly.
And so many of the reptiles in the pet trade come from warm areas, and so they find a very welcoming environment when they get to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
An Argentine black and white tegu that escaped in New York, how many winters would it survive?
Probably none.
So
none. Our winters are getting a little more. What's the word I'm looking for there? They're less harsh. But we still, our December, a lot of snow, and we had some really below zero weather at nighttime. So yeah, there's no tegu, python, boa ever going to survive in this area. We have it happen. I've gotten calls myself to go get, oh God, it was a Burmese python maybe 20 years ago, so it doesn't happen often. That was found in a playground behind one of our local schools. That's when berms were legal. Now they're illegal in New York.
Now they're illegal.
Now they're illegal, which is probably a good thing.
I always think, sometimes I'd say it's necessary. But I always think to some extent that when you ban something, you're admitting defeat. I guess you got to do it sometimes, but I don't see banning things really as a solution to the problem. That's not shutting the door before the horse got out. After the horse got out, that's shutting the door after the barn burned down.
Yeah, we don't have a complete ban in New York. It's just that all the big pythons, crocodilians, venomous snakes, as far as the reptile part is concerned, are all considered dangerous animals. So you have to have a proper license and be approved to have them. So I got the license. I'm able to still work with them, but you can't just go buy one as a pet.
Green iguanas are a prohibited species in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And they're since we had a hard freeze in 2010, the number and area of green iguanas has just skyrocketed. And so, I don't really know what else you could do at this point in time because we're way past eradicating them. There might be some areas where we can do population control and minimize damage. One of their big things that they do is they burrow for nests and they live along levees where we do our water management and keep the floodwaters out of where people live. And they cause a lot of damage to the levees. So that's that's a serious problem.
Yeah.
And so we might be able to reduce the population to the level where we can minimize damage, but we're not getting rid of them.
Yeah, I was down in the Keys the end of the summer, and they were just all over the place. And when we're
all
walking
over.
around in Key West, yeah, there was an area where there had to be a dozen of them, and some of the males were 5.5 feet long. Incredible.
Yeah.
And they're used to people. They didn't want you to touch them. They didn't want you to get too close, but they let you get within a few feet before they just walk. They didn't even run. They're that acclimated. Yeah. But I've heard stories in Mexico where they go to resorts and they'll just jump on tables and eat the people's lunch leftovers.
I could see that happening. You can condition them otherwise, but if you don't even have to encourage them. You just kind of have to not do anything, and they'll, especially red, they'll fight you for a strawberry.
Yeah, yes, that I've noticed. So we could probably go on forever, but I do want to ask you, before we started, you let me know that you were originally from Long Island. So, you know, I get the question all the time as a New Yorker, why crocodilians? It's not like it's something you grew up seeing in your backyard. How did you eventually become the Croc Doc?
I think a lot of it has to do growing up really being enamored of Tarzan. And all of his adventures. And then, but as I kind of got older, I realized that I was never going to make it. And then kind of when I was a graduate student at University of Miami, a fellow student got me interested in reptiles and amphibians. And I just loved being out in the Everglades at night. And then the next, and this was really the critical step, when I was finishing graduate school, I was looking for a job, and Jim Cushlan in Everglades National Park offered me a job to work on wading birds for crocodiles. And, you know, everybody had worked on wading birds. Nobody had worked on crocodiles. So I said crocodiles. And then he said, well, you realize you're going to have to work at night. And I kind of felt a little bit about Brer Rabbit, you know, oh, don't throw me in the briar patch. But no, I love working at night. I feel very, very comfortable out in the Everglades at night. People ask me that all the time. Where I don't feel comfortable is trying to cross US 1, one of our main highways, at night. Nuh-uh. That makes me feel very uncomfortable. But being out in the Everglades, catching a crocodile, very, very, very comfortable.
I think that is the best story to end this with. Otherwise, we'll probably go on all night. But I'm going to tell everybody out there that's watching to check information in my comments and description. I'm going to leave the Croc Docs website so that people can see the work that you're doing there. I know you have a tab for both.
And we've got a Facebook page where we keep people current on what we're doing. So absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to put that there. They can see your projects, your outreach, your education, and especially the work you're doing with crocodilians and trying to mitigate the invasive problem and help the Everglades. So I'm going to ask you to stay on for just maybe 2 more minutes. But folks, thanks for watching. And till next time, later, Gator.